And I thought, why is there not really any comics about super bad guys? You know, with all these superhero comics, but there's no super villain comics, really, you know?
Nemesis by Mark Millar and Steve McNiven is a 4-issue miniseries published by Marvel Comics in 2010 under the Icon imprint. Icon was an exclusive, creator-owned imprint, and a way for Marvel to hold on to specific creators while allowing them the freedom to do independent work without going to a different publisher. The majority of the material was done by either Brian Michael Bendis or Mark Millar, although they did publish work by Ed Brubaker, J. Michael Straczynski, and a few others. I have to admit, as I've done multiple times, that Mark Millar is my least favorite comic book writer, perhaps of all time. This doesn't mean I think he's a terrible person and deserves a horrible death. Not at all. I can easily dislike a piece of media without demanding the creator face some suitable punishment. By most accounts, Millar is a fairly lovely person, although Grant Morrison, who mentored Millar during his early career and who allegedly ghostwrote a fair amount of Millar's work, is rather displeased with him. The reasons for their friendship ending are not publicly known, but it was supposedly quite bitter. In fact, Mark Waid based the metatextual webcomic Insufferable around the relationship he witnessed between Morrison and Millar, but one can only speculate about the source of their acrimony. Otherwise, you have to do some digging to find anything on the record that says Millar isn't a decent fellow, and I have no problem believing that whatsoever. After all, one can be a terrible hack writer or a middle-aged comic book YouTuber and still be a pretty good person. Finally, it has to be acknowledged that Millar is a very successful writer, perhaps one of the most successful in modern times. Not only does he sell a lot of comics, but his properties have been turned into successful movies. And in 2017, Netflix bought Millarworld for an undisclosed sum of money. Overall, Millar is quite popular, and he's done very well for himself. So his work definitely has appeal, and I'm the lone jerk on the internet who thinks his juvenile plots and ridiculous dialogue are exactly the type of material the public thinks about when they think about superhero stories. They're all loud, dumb action scenes, with psychopaths in leather and latex living out their violent fantasies. And underneath it all is a contempt for the audience who consumes this material. Which conveniently brings us to Nemesis. If you're new and you like what you see, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. If you want to go a step further and directly support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. As always, thank you for watching. Now on with the video. The foundation for Nemesis is the question, what if Batman was evil and blamed Commissioner Gordon for the death of his parents? The answer to that question is, Batman would hone his skills by unaliving police chiefs around the world before finally seeking revenge. Nemesis has an additional character hook. He gives his target a card that predicts the exact moment they will die. Then he plots an overly elaborate scenario to bring about his target's end at that specific time. The opening scene of the first issue conveniently lays out all these details. Nemesis gloats, while his victim is helplessly tied to a chair sitting on a set of railroad tracks. He misleads a police tactical squad into a hotel that he blows up. The hotel lands on and destroys the train tracks. A train arrives precisely at the time Nemesis predicted, unaliving the target before speeding off and derailing, at which point Nemesis declares his next victim. If this were a Marvel movie, this is where the logo animation would be inserted. The comic hard cuts to the target, Blake Morrow, taking down a group of robbers in a suitably violent manner. At the crime scene, it's established that Morrow is very popular, with a social schedule that includes a bunch of prominent, smart people. So, Morrow has to be pretty smart too. Then he's handed a card that came from Nemesis, proclaiming he will die on a specific date. It includes the added provision that a flatline still counts. Why does Morrow's heart stopping count? Because it's what Millar plotted and it sounded cool at the time. Even though it makes no sense that Nemesis would consider anything less than death as a victory, especially when it's the person who was responsible for the death of his parents. Don't worry, we'll circle back to this origin story later. Anyway, in case Morrow's perfect heroic character wasn't blatantly obvious, other characters make sure to drive the point home. Morrow is the most awesome cop ever. The first issue closes with Nemesis landing on the wing of Air Force One, crashing it, and kidnapping the president. Conveniently, Nemesis guides the plane down a tunnel which, conveniently, has a stalled tanker truck filled with gasoline. Conveniently, a mother and daughter are waiting to be crushed to maximize the casual waste of life. Conveniently, Nemesis survives the explosion and he conveniently takes out the president's security detail. Then he conveniently escapes the mayhem he caused with the crashed plane, all of which takes place off-panel. All in all, it's an indication of the level of ridiculousness one can expect from the next 3 issues. It's not just over-the-top action, it's so absurd, it unintentionally turns into a parody of itself. Now, one can reasonably state that the string of dumb action scenes that make up the series are no worse than an average blockbuster movie. Honestly, that is a valid argument. After all, directors such as Michael Bay, Justin Lin, and Roland Emmerich make incredibly stupid but equally successful movies. As a counterpoint, there's also James Cameron, George Miller, Sam Raimi, and Christopher Nolan, all of whom are equally successful and know how to craft a movie with tense action and good character beats without relying on a constant barrage of set pieces to hold a movie together. The point being, there's a difference between a spectacle and a stupid spectacle that requires a vacant spectator. Nemesis is the latter. It requires the audience to empty their minds and just accept 10,000 impossible things for the sake of violent entertainment. How did Nemesis approach Air Force One without being blown from the sky by a fighter jet? How did Nemesis walk from the plane wing to the cockpit without being thrown off by the airspeed? How did he breathe without an oxygen mask? How did Nemesis unload a big-ass gun into the cockpit without damaging any essential flight equipment? Why did Nemesis crash in a city instead of a field or a body of water where he'd have a softer landing and a better chance at escape? These are all inconvenient questions. But the answer to all of them is, because it was totally awesome, man, Nemesis is a badass. In the second issue, Nemesis unalives everyone at the Pentagon because evil. Then he steals a donor organ from a dying child because evil. This turns out to be a setup by Morrow, and it leads to an extended chase scene where Nemesis is caught. However, this capture was all according to plan because Nemesis is a genius. Of course, in the third issue, Nemesis escapes and kidnaps Morrow's children. He then forces Morrow to admit 3 disturbing family secrets in order to secure their release. Naturally, these secrets involve infidelity, homosexuality, and a teen pregnancy with a forced termination, all of which are embarrassing admissions that contradict Morrow's upright public image. True to his word, Nemesis releases the children, but not before Millar decides to turn the cringe factor all the way to 11 by not only impregnating the sister with the brother's genetic material, but also ensuring the pregnancy can't be terminated. The final issue is a standard showdown between Morrow and Nemesis, but oh my gosh, there are so many revelations that your mind will explode. Nemesis isn't out for revenge on Morrow for the death of his parents, he's just some rich guy having fun. But wait, there's more. Nemesis and Morrow have one final fight before they both shoot one another. Nemesis dies, and Morrow flatlines at midnight, except he's revived, thus fulfilling the contrived plot point from the first issue. The biggest reveal is saved for the end. The real Nemesis is a super genius who enables rich people's supervillain fantasies. He's so damn smart, he sent Morrow a letter and a bottle of wine 10 years before the events of the comic took place. Hard cut to movie title and credits. The revenge motivation of Nemesis is completely discarded for the sake of a double shock reveal and an ending that borrows heavily from Silence of the Lambs. As a reader, you have to feel cheated. Millar wasn't being clever or inventive with these sudden reveals. A good writer would have subtly hinted that Nemesis wasn't who he proclaimed to be, and dropped clues for the reader to discover. A good writer would have indicated, through foreshadowing or other characters, that this origin story was a false narrative. Instead, Millar, the actual person writing the story, is the false narrator. He tells the reader, through the character's own dialogue, that he's getting revenge for the death of his parents. This is a writer straight up lying through the character he's writing. Why continually reinforce this fake vendetta when it's utterly irrelevant? Why the misdirection? What purpose does it serve? That's the big question. Why would Nemesis even bother to reveal a fake origin? To hide his true identity? To unbalance Morrow? What is the endgame of this tactic? There is literally no payoff to any reasonable question one might form. All of these dangling questions indicate a writer who doesn't know how to craft a surprise ending without lying outright to the reader. At best, this tactic is a cheap trick, but really it's fundamentally bad writing from someone who doesn't respect his audience. Because it takes no skill to withhold information from the reader, it's just lazy and unskilled. And yes, I do know this origin was recently retconned in Nemesis Reloaded. I mean, that's practically an admission that the ending of Nemesis was so convoluted and stupid that it needed to be rewritten. Nemesis also contains a regular fixture in Millar's work. He tells, he doesn't show, especially when constructing an actual plan that is, hard and requires some thought. Some might suggest that Millar is just using classic compressed story beats to have a rapid-fire plot. And in some instances, that's true. However, for the most part, it's a writer who doesn't know how to set up a scene, or get out of it. A few examples of show, don't tell are: after crashing Air Force One, Nemesis is suddenly at his lair with the president. He practically teleports from a huge fireball explosion to an undisclosed, previously unestablished location. When Nemesis poisons everyone at the Pentagon, it just happens. You know, it's probably the most secure building in the world, but Nemesis just walks in and wipes everyone out. Sure, that's completely believable. While in prison, hundreds of cars are delivered to the prison parking lot. No one notices or gets alarmed that a bunch of people are parking identical cars outside the prison, because that's not unusual at all. The prison exploding afterwards is just an added layer of whatever icing on that poorly made cake. By the way, at no point in the previous issues, or during that issue, did Nemesis warn the police not to arrest him, nor did he say he'd break out of prison if he was arrested. This is definitely a blatant example of tell, don't show. The sudden kidnapping of Morrow's children is all off-panel. Thankfully, so is the abuse they suffer. In this case, this omission is actually a good thing. Finally, there's another teleportation from the Anderson estate to the White House. Again, there's no Secret Service personnel, or, for that matter, a military force that responds to the White House being invaded. Why is the White House empty? Well, it has to be, so there can be a cool fight scene on the White House lawn. In the end, Nemesis is just a mindless spectacle. It's completely empty of substance or any self-awareness. To be fair, it's basic action movie escapism, and that appeals to a fair amount of people, so if that's your thing, then enjoy it. Critically speaking, it's just absurd and obnoxious, with cardboard characters and ridiculous situations that ends on a silly forced surprise, so the writer can feel like a clever little liar. Well, I can imagine the comments section might explode on this video, so I should reiterate, like what you like. If Mark Millar is your jam, then go for it. Seriously, I genuinely don't care about changing your tastes in reading material. For those wondering, my intent was to finally answer a question I get asked all the time. Why do I dislike Mark Millar's work? Well, this video is the basic reply to that question. It generally applies to any series you can think of. But let's not end on a completely negative note. What is Millar's best work? I think a lot of people would say Red Sun or his Superman Adventures run, but let me know nonetheless. Finally, thanks to all my lovely supporters. There's a link to my Patreon in the description and in the comments, so please sign up. Thanks to all current patrons, and an extra special thanks to Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, Marc-Antoine Martinetti, Johnny Lim, Aaron Segman, Steve White, Taylor Dull, Zach Kleinfelter, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Thank you one and all, and thanks for watching. Until next time.